The US and Turkey reportedly have proof Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered. His body cut up in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Diplomatic pressures now increasing, and businesses are getting nervous and pulling out of deals with Saudi Arabia. So, what does it mean for the oil-rich country? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. It's been 10 days since journalist Jamal Khashoggi went missing in Turkey. US and Turkish officials have now been quoted saying they have proof the Saudi critic was killed inside his country's consulate in Istanbul. Outrage over the case has been widespread, and it's threatening to destroy Saudi Arabia's image makeover. Our guests are here to discuss that. But first, a report by Stephanie Decker from Istanbul.
They are explosive allegations. The Washington Post quotes Turkish and U.S. officials, confirming that Turkey has audio and video recordings that prove Jamal Khashoggi was killed inside the Saudi consulate. You can hear his voice and the voices of men speaking Arabic, an anonymous source tells the paper. You can hear how he was interrogated, tortured, and then murdered. Another source says men could be heard beating Khashoggi.
This is a crime, and the reason it is a crime is that it is during enforced disappearances that torture happens and that killings can happen. So at a minimum, an enforced disappearance, and if it's true that he was assassinated inside the embassy, then they would also be responsible for extrajudicial executions. So the responsibility is clear for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It is for them to reveal his fate and his whereabouts at this time.
Saudi Arabia has remained silent since its initial statement that Khashoggi left the consulate shortly after he arrived and that the accusations of murder are baseless. But revelations that Turkey has audio and video evidence of what is alleged to have happened is ramping up pressure on the kingdom. If true, it would explain why Turkey was so quick to conclude that Jamal Khashoggi was killed inside that consulate. But it also raises questions as to how Turkey had access to what exactly went on inside the diplomatic mission. Ankar's been using Turkish and foreign media to get its message out, feeding through a steady stream of leaks of what appears to have been an unprecedented sequence of events. Of a well-known and well-connected Saudi journalist who returned to the consulate to finalize paperwork in order to get married, never to re-emerge.
I was horrified because he assured me when we were in London that there was nothing to be concerned about. He said on Friday he had been to the consulate. They received him very well, although they were initially surprised to see him, and promised him if he came back again a few days later, they would issue him with the papers he was after. So he felt it was okay, but apparently they prepared a trap for him.
On Thursday night, Turkey's presidential spokesman said they had agreed to set up a joint working group at the request of the Saudis to investigate the disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi. The Saudi delegation has arrived in Turkey on Friday for that purpose. Turkey's been waiting to search the consulate and also the home of the Saudi Consul General. They need the Saudis' permission to do so. But it seems, if the latest reports are true, that the Turks already know exactly what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. Stephanie Decker, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.
Let's bring in our panel in Washington, D.C. Sigurd Noybauer, a non-resident fellow at Gulf International Forum. In London, Gilbert Ashcar, a professor in development studies and international relations at the School of Oriental and African Studies, part of the University of London. And here in Doha, Mohammed Shirkawi, a professor of conflict resolution at George Mason University. Welcome to you all. Let's start with you, Mohammed. It seems almost on a daily basis that either the Turkish or the American authorities are releasing new information, the latest being that there are audio and video recordings, say the Turks, of the alleged murder, and the Americans say there is audio at least of the plot being discussed. Now, what's behind the Saudi strategy? All they seem to be doing is, when they have responded, is issuing blanket denials. What's behind the strategy there?
Well, there is this irony that the Turkish intelligence, the Turkish Ministry of Interior did not give us any indication where the investigation has gone so far. In the meantime, the Turkish media is doing this role, is assuming this responsibility. And at the same time, I think there are two parallels here. One is security intelligence investigation that has been suppressed by politics. And there is the other parallel, which is basically the hotlines between Riyadh and Ankara in order to find an exit or a kind of discourse.
But they're not doing that, are they? That's the problem. The Saudis don't seem to be responding to what Ankara is trying to get them to do, which is find a way out of this.
Well, it seems to me that the complexity of Khashoggi case is wider than what we expect. I think we should all understand the ramifications either in economic, diplomatic, and strategic dimensions. And I think now Turkey is part of this triangle, Riyadh, Ankara, Washington, where we lose facts. We are all basically faced by this open-ended scrutiny, and I don't think that we have seen it yet. In other words, I think there is a process of negotiations, and I think the Saudi wealth is significant in the eyes of Erdogan, as well as in the eyes of Trump, and then I think the financial suppresses facts.
Well, let's take a look at that with one of our other guests from Washington, D.C. Now it's Sigurd Noybauer. Is Saudi Arabia too big to fail?
Let me begin by saying that Jamal Khashoggi is a close friend and colleague, and he was very close to, or is hopefully very close to many in Washington's policy community. And every time that we had an inquiry or a question about what is happening in the Gulf region and in Saudi Arabia in particular, we would always consult with him, and he would very gracefully share his insights and his ideas with us. So this story has really hit us very hard here in Washington. He knew a lot of people here, and a lot of people are now stepping forward to speak on his behalf. And this is such an emotional story that, of course, intersects with geopolitics and regional dynamics. But as to your question, I think that because this investigation is ongoing, a lot of the drips leaks that we are seeing so far do not look favorable to the Saudi side. That is for sure. But I think that we still have to see how the Turkish response is, because President Erdogan sits on all the evidence, and we don't quite know as of yet what his objective is. Is his objective to balance on one hand, to bring out the truth of what happened or what may have happened to Khashoggi, or is his priority to balance between Washington and Turkey on one hand? And we have seen that reports are coming out that Pastor Bruson will be returning to the United States. He was a political prisoner for all practical purposes in Turkey, and that seems to be coinciding with this joint Saudi-Turkish investigation. So there are a lot of pieces that are unfolding as of now.
A lot of moving parts. Let's bring in Gilbert Ashcar here. What do you think of the Saudi strategy so far? Issuing blanket denials, saying that the cameras weren't working. Are they managing to sell their side of the story successfully?
No, it's obvious that they are in an extremely difficult situation. That has been a gigantic miscalculation. I'm sure they didn't have, or whoever ordered this did not have any expectation that it would take such proportions. And as I think it was Elliot Abrams in the Washington Post, quoting very aptly this famous saying from French history, "It's worse than a crime, it's an error." And that means that, very cynically put, states commit a lot of crimes, but when they do them under conditions leading to such a major crisis, this is a terrible blunder. So I can't see any real way out of that, because unless, of course, the miracle happened and Khashoggi would re-emerge alive, which seems to be completely excluded.
So some doubt there
this
from Gilbert
is extremely
Ashcar,
damaging.
some doubt there from Gilbert Ashcar about whether there is a way out. Sorry to disturb you there, but it's a very important point that I want to follow up on. Mohammed Shirkawi, what is the Saudis to do? Did they realise, if this indeed is proved to be true, did they realise quite who Jamal Khashoggi was?
I think they made two mistakes. One, they underestimated the personality and the PR around Khashoggi. To them, it was another Saudi citizen who can be eliminated easily. Second mistake was they forget that this is a new age of politics, and I think they are developing their own Lockerbie scandal. In other words, total denial and then drip, little, and it may last for a year or two before they acknowledge what they did, like what Gaddafi did back in the 90s. So we are not going to have some moral politics come in, or at least they are not going to assume responsibility. At the same time, I think now it's more of a global crisis. It's not just about Khashoggi. I think what it reveals is about how the power of Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, has peaked. And I think if we consider the Khashoggi case and the Aramco controversial decision 6 weeks ago, I think to me now his power is in decline, and I think he will disappear from the screen for a while. I'm not sure that there is strong or there is enough pressure to side him or to marginalize him, but he is not going to have the same clout he used to have back in 2017 and early 2018.
Let's bring back in Gilbert Ashcar. You heard the assessment there. Perhaps the only way out of this for Saudi Arabia is some sort of removal in some way of the Crown Prince. Is that something, do you think, the Saudis would ever consider?
Yeah, well, that's actually what I was going to say before you interrupt me. It is precisely, I mean, this comes at a time when you had rumors about a possible dismissal of the Crown Prince, rumors about the fact that his father was rather unhappy with the results of what he's done. And actually, if you make a balance sheet of everything he's done, it's a terribly negative, I mean, it's a balance sheet of failure. So, I mean, one could expect under such conditions, and knowing that the rest of the family in the Saudi kingdom, the royal family, is quite unhappy with this turn, the whole turn of event, I wouldn't be surprised if anything happened like this. If nothing happened of this kind, that means that the Crown Prince is completely in control of the situation in the kingdom.
Well, let's take a look now at the latest of what's going on, what the Crown Prince has actually been up to. The Khashoggi case has prompted some big names to distance themselves from Saudi Arabia. Richard Branson, the founder of the Virgin Group, has suspended 2 directorships on Saudi tourism projects and talks over a space venture. Former US Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz is backing away from the Crown Prince's mega city dream project, NEOM. And the New York Times has pulled out as a media sponsor of an investment summit due in Riyadh in 2 weeks. The Los Angeles Times and the Huffington Post are also giving the event a miss. The World Bank chief and key business leaders from Viacom, Uber, AOL, HP Incorporated are also staying away from the conference. The Saudi Crown Prince's Vision 2030 project seeks to radically change the image of the kingdom, but he's been criticised over human rights issues, economic reforms and foreign policy. Late last year, many Saudi princes and businessmen were arrested on allegations of corruption. Some of them were only released after paying hefty fines. The highly anticipated listing of the state-owned oil giant Aramco on global stock markets has been put on hold. And Mohammed bin Salman decided that Saudi forces would join the war in Yemen, backing the Yemeni government. 3 years on from the fighting against the Houthis, it continues, and it's led to what the UN calls the world's worst humanitarian disaster. The blockade of Qatar, since last June by some Arab countries, was led by Saudi Arabia and has split the Gulf Cooperation Council, causing regional instability. Now, Jamal Khashoggi was on Inside Story earlier this year. Here's a bit of what he told us as he cautions the Crown Prince about his ambitious economic reforms.
we are talking about what is budgeted for those projects is something like about $700 billion, more than $500 billion. And all what we have right now in our assets in foreign currency, something like 400 billions. Add the Aramco 100 billion, that is 500 billions. What if that money goes to waste? What if those projects turn into a white elephant? This is scary. It's a scary scenario. That's why I would like to see more check and balance in Saudi Arabia, so such adventures will not go unchecked. Those ideas need to be checked by the Saudi society because it is our future altogether.
So Jamal Khashoggi there, really talking about the need for oversight on all of the mega financial projects that are in place, including things like the NEOM megacity project. Let me just bring in Washington, D.C. here and Sigurd Noybauer. Sigurd, clearly the U.S. is a massive client of Saudi Arabia. Trump says, the U.S. president says that it's worth $110 billion. That was fact-checked by the Washington Post. Those deals haven't quite been signed yet. What's Washington's reaction here? Is the Crown Prince, as Jamal Khashoggi just said there, running a shop almost single-handedly, or does he need much more oversight than he's getting?
Well, we know that when Crown Prince Mohammed rose to power, after he pushed out Mohammed bin Nayef, who was at the time the Crown Prince, and he forced him into retirement, for lack of a better term, all of that was contingent upon U.S. support. And once that had happened, he left the kingdom for the first time in March 2018 to come here to the United States to tout himself as, on one hand, a reformer, but also, on the other hand, to lure American businesses to Saudi Arabia. But what it really was about was that Mohammed bin Salman felt that he had direct support from President Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and that they had helped push him forward to become the de facto leader. So that is the bet that MBS made at the time. Of course, now that this Khashoggi affair is playing out in the United States, what has happened is that the Khashoggi affair has now become part of U.S. domestic politics. So in other words, Democrats and those who oppose Trump and his policies are now joining the anti-Saudi bandwagon, and all of a sudden, Saudi Arabia finds itself in the crosshairs of America's messy and divisive politics, and that's a very dangerous place for Saudi Arabia to be because of the unpredictable state of American politics at the moment. And
well, let me bring in Gilbert Ashcar here. Let me bring in Gilbert Ashcar here. You've heard what our guest in DC had to say, that there is a danger to the US-Saudi relationship due to this affair. Is that something you would agree with?
I really doubt this very much. I mean, of course, you can't exclude. I mean, if Congress, if the Republicans, if you have a real movement being built up there and exerting real pressure, that might lead to some consequences. But fundamentally, the Saudi kingdom is too big a prize for the United States just to let it down for an issue like this. I mean, it would take, I think, much more than that. And actually, I can't see the kingdom itself continuing without this connection to the United States. The kingdom has, for all intents and purposes, been a vassal of the United States, and this is going to continue.
Let me bring in Mohammed Shakawi here. Is it that the US simply has no options when it comes down to Saudi Arabia, that they simply have to continue to keep doing business as usual?
I don't think that Washington has a linear view or perspective. I think this is a time where the White House on the one hand and the establishment on the other are debating to what extent Saudi Arabia remains an asset, or maybe sometimes it turns into a liability. So to me, I think there are certain leaders in the Congress who are looking to Saudi Arabia from the perspective of liability. That's why they are now resisting more arms deals, and they are reconsidering the whole U.S.-Saudi relations. At the same time, I would like to summarize my point. This is a moment, if we add the Khashoggi case to the Aramco, to the 2030, and the war in Yemen, and the escalation toward Iran, this is a moment of an eclipse of the Saudi power regionally and globally. Moreover, I think it seems to me that nobody would disagree with the promise of modernity. Mohammed bin Salman promised the Saudis and the Gulf nations. However, his tactics are more of a realpolitik, Machiavellian ways. Therefore, he is now defeating himself by all these errors and slanders. In other words, I don't think that there is a room for either absorbing or ignoring. And I think in international relations, especially between West European, American governments and Saudi Arabia, it boils down to what profit you bring to me, either in diplomatic or financial. And I think Trump so far has defended, especially his statement yesterday, he is trying to preserve the $110 billion from investment from Saudi Arabia. But the question is, can he maintain this while the Congress and other individuals, even within his administration, are saying, no, we should not invest too much in the errors of Mohammed bin Salman, and then we will lose more in the long run. So it's a matter of wait and see, and I don't think that the international relations of Saudi Arabia will remain the same they were 2 years ago.
Let me bring in Sigurd Noybauer here. What we're hearing there is that there is a US-Saudi relationship which is crucial and that needs to continue. But does the US Crown Prince relationship need to continue? Is that what the real problem is?
Well, let me just clarify. I agree with what was said by my two fellow panelists here, that the US-Saudi relationship will prevail and that it is strategic. But what is different now compared to the 9/11 attacks in 2001 is that when President Bush at the time made a strategic decision to preserve the U.S.-Saudi strategic partnership, even at that very difficult time, he had both political parties behind him. What has happened this time is that the opposition to President Trump calls themselves resistance, and they will do anything. Once Democrats come into power, they will reverse all Trump-era policies, and that could have direct consequences for Saudi Arabia. And that was my initial point, and that is why Saudi Arabia is in a very treacherous position right now. Back to your question, what really is at stake here is that this is the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States is not a relationship between Trump and MBS. It is between the two states, and it's between the two people. And the question is, if the relationship just becomes defined by personalities, that could really jeopardize the entire relationship going forward, and certainly on the economic and security cooperation, as we have seen now that businesses are potentially pulling out of pledged investments in Saudi Arabia over this.
Let me just stop you. It does seem to be a relationship based around personalities. You have the US President Donald Trump and you have the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, both very large personalities, both wanting to do business on a personal level. Now, what we're seeing and what we're hearing is that the Mohammed bin Salman is under a tremendous amount of pressure right now from within the US government, not necessarily within the White House. So where does this all go? Let me bring in Mohammed Sharkawi right now. Is there a way out of this that allows Mohammed bin Salman to survive? Just very quickly.
I think between the Aramco case and the Khashoggi case, we will see less presence of Mohammed bin Salman in the screen. In other words, capitals in Washington, in London, and elsewhere will avoid dealing with him directly. They will go through other channels. So now I think King Salman will reemerge as the de facto ruler. At the same time, I think Mohammed bin Salman has reactivated the Jasta debate. So this is something that he was not prepared for. Therefore, I think the U.S. Saudi relations will be captive of this debate of politics versus moral politics, Jasta versus other, calls
I'm going to have to stop you there. We are running out of time. Interesting thoughts from you all. I want to thank you, Sigurd Noybauer, Gilbert Ashcar and Mohammed Shakawi. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team, bye for now.